Hi, I just want to take 2 minutes of your time before the next podcast to answer the question that Patricia Haywood sent me in episode 16. Patricia asked about the effects of hierarchy on around leadership and that effect on hierarchy in organizations and construction projects. And it's a really good question, actually. Organizations typically, especially in construction sector, are hierarchical. So we start with the CEO at the top and it's micro pyramid, and then at the bottom we have the majority of the people doing the sort of labor intensive work. So the organizations and projects are now starting to become flatter in that you have to be able to work with people that aren't your direct line manager or your direct authority. So you're having to now lead without authority. So this presents sort of great opportunities because this could drive productivity, but for leadership, it also develops challenges. So you have to be able to really care about the people that you work with and that you are responsible for and that you lead, really sort of engage with them and develop those relationships. Because you're having to do that now without the authority of being able to say, I am your boss, you have to do this, this is the way you've got to do it. And sort of employees are having more power and more say in how organizations are run. So you really need to develop those leadership skills in which you can create those relationships, create those environments in which people really feel valued and want to come to work and want to work productively for that cause. And those leaders that really embrace this new way of working really will make an impact in their organization, within their sector. And those that stick with the old ways of hierarchy and you must do what I say, I'm your boss, they will sort of start to fall behind. So leadership is really coming to the forefront in how organizations are run and how projects are run. And it could never be more important that we all up our skills in leadership, which leads really nicely into this week's podcast with Alex Slavenburg. In this episode, we talk about his book, Leading with a Smile, and there's some really, really great topics within this podcast that relate to how we can really care for the people that we lead and how we can lead. So I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to the 18th episode of the Leadership and Construction Podcast. I'm your host, Michael, and today we're joined by Alex Slavenburg.
Hi, guys.
Alex is the author of the book, Leading with a Smile. So, Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you, Michael.
And you. We've had this one in the diary for quite a while, so, I've been really looking forward to this, especially after reading your book. So, cool. I really sort of wanted to start off, like I do most podcasts, is really just understand a bit more about yourself, a bit of your background, how you got into leadership, and what sort of gave you that motivation to write the book.
Cool. Yeah, I'm an author now, which is still a little bit fun to say, but it's my book Leading with a Smile is out now, so that's great. I'm a writer since last year, starting with it. And my fascination on leadership is mainly because I started being a leader when I was 21. I'm a background as banker. I worked for Rabobank, an international food and ag bank, for 28 years. I started early on my 20th, and one of the first roles I got was assistant branch manager. And I still remember the moment that I had to fire someone, and she was much older than me. And I thought, oh my gosh, what I'm going to do. And so leadership was new at that moment. And I had a lot of different roles. I had, from the 28 years, I was a leader for 25 years. in Holland. So the Rabobank was based in Holland. I've been assistant branch manager, team leader, director in the board of a bank in the north of Holland. I worked for Rabobank in California for 3 years. And my last role was head of talent management, global head talent management in the HR department in Utrecht. So leadership was always sort of part of what I was doing, and I liked it because I was working with people, and especially working with others and getting results and working together and coaching them, helping them, let them develop and making steps on their own. That was what gave me energy. And the funny thing is, I was always a banker in the business part of banking, so mortgages, current accounts, etc. And my last role, I did a step from business to HR because I was most fascinated with people and leadership, and I thought I need to do more on that. So I made the jump into HR. I jumped into HR after being in the business for a long time, because I wanted to work more with people and with leadership topics, etc. And I made the jump. I was very happy with that, but just for a couple of weeks. And after that, I really felt like, hey, there's something wrong, and I wasn't happy. And eventually, end of 2016, after a couple of months, I was standing before the group and saying, hey guys, I'm not happy. My talents are not working anymore, so I'll quit. So I quit my job. And after that, of course, the main question was, what makes me happy, right? So I didn't know what the next thing will be. So I sort of jumped into the world of what makes me happy, and I discovered the world of happiness at work, and discovered that the topic itself and helping people with that topic was very interesting. And I thought about what makes me unique. So let's work on the happiness at work topic, but there's a lot of people doing that. And I have 25 years of leadership development for my own, right? I was a leader. I've seen it all, as far as you can say that. So I really specialized in a niche for happiness at work and leadership. And after about a year or 1.5 years after I started my own business, my business is called Happy Motion, making happiness at work in motion. And let things happen. My idea was, how great would it be if you are a leader, that you like it, you feel the energy, you have a smile because you're a leader, you're good at it, and people you're leading are seeing that and feeling that, so they get a smile as well. So that's how the book Leading with a Smile sort of started. And I raised the idea and people were excited about it, so I started writing it, and eventually now this year it's out in the open, so very proud of that.
And how long did it take you to write, out of curiosity?
Well, the first version was because I wrote it in Dutch first, and after that it is translated. So the first version was a couple of weeks, or sort of, but the thinking before that took years, right? I was thinking about the book already. So the first version in Dutch took a couple of weeks to have a sort of draft, and then starts the whole process of, hey, adding stuff and making examples, and then translating it, or at least make a version which will be good for the English version. That took me even longer because it's a different vibe. I took more new examples, more international examples. So yeah, a couple of months in total. And asking people to read it, give reviews, etc. So based on that, rewriting it again. And now I have the version here, so it's great to have the book, and it's on the market now. So very proud of it. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it is a good book. I have enjoyed reading it.
Cool.
One question I really like to ask is, you're leading with a smile. So do you see yourself as like an optimist, and is there a difference between sort of being happy at work, being an optimist? Because I don't think I would call myself an optimist, but I generally feel quite happy. So is there sort of a difference? So have you really thought much about that?
Well, if I'm an optimistic, and naturally my personality is an optimistic guy, so I'm looking at the bright side of things. in general, if you look at happiness at work, then not the message is you always have to be happy. Or when you're leading with a smile, you always have to be happy and always smile. That's not my message. If you look at happiness at work, then the main thing is how do you cope with everything which comes around, right? The good things, but also the bad things. Or if you have to fire people, or if you have to reorganize stuff and all processes are changed, or you have a regulator saying all kinds of stuff you don't like, etc. So how do you cope with everything what comes? And of course, if you look at happiness at work, it's different for every person individual. So if you would say what makes you happy, then you have other emotions and other stories than I. In general, there are two things which are really important, and that's the results which you get from your work and the relationships you have on your work with your co-workers, with your manager, with your customers, etc. So, and what you see in general with leading or being a leader, which is more than being the boss, like being in the position to be the boss of other people. That's not what I mean with leadership. It's taking the lead, but you don't have to be an optimist to take the lead, right? There are I know grumpy people who are very good in taking a lead and getting things done. The question, of course, always is, especially when they are really grumpy but good at getting stuff done, is what is their effect on people and how do they interact together?
I think that's for me.
Yeah, sorry. And the optimistic guys, most of the time, have a different relationship with their people than what I can say, more grumpy people. Not saying that you are a grumpy person, but I mean, the optimistic guys are most of the time going, hey, what's possible? And some of the time they are very naive, right? So that's a risk in it as well. So
I see. I think I'd probably classify myself as a sort of defensive pessimist. But I'm sort of, I class myself as happy, but I got this strong sort of sense of self-awareness that my emotions and my behaviors really affect the people that I work with. So it is a challenge for me to constantly look on the positive and constantly be happy whilst leading, because the way I just cope with things, as I've sort of realized through this process and becoming more self-aware, is that I sort of anticipate the worst, in that I can plan for it and then make sure that the worst sort of doesn't happen, or that we can have a much better outcome than the worst, if that makes sense. But if I try and ignore that puts me in a very stressed and anxious position, because I fear that I'm not considering everything in all angles. If I imagine at the moment I'm renovating a garage, and I try and think of absolutely everything that could go wrong with this and try and plan that it doesn't go wrong. So I sort of say, I'm sort of defensive pessimist. So I do find as a challenge for me is to stay optimistic, stay happy and smile all the time, but I'm aware, super conscious that actually that does affect other people and their behaviors and how they feel as part of the team that we're leading.
Well, and my main suggestion would be don't try to be always optimistic or always smile, because the main thing you have to be is yourself, right? Be your authentic self. So if you're sort of careful about things, or things happen, you say, oh, if I hope nothing's going wrong, that's the main thing you react on, then that's your main reaction, and that's how you are, right? That's your personality as well. So if you would sort of throw that away and say, hey, I have to smile all the time, otherwise my people won't follow me, or they're not happy, etc., then they will not follow you as well, because they will feel and see, maybe at least feel, that you're not yourself, you're not authentic.
That's it. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's one of the key things in your book about being authentic.
Exactly. So, and everything has a plus and a minus, right? So if you're careful as a person, then the positive thing is that big risks are probably sort of monitored, and you can see that, and you see that coming up already. And the negative part of it is might be that you are so careful that nothing happens, or at least it takes more time, etc., etc. And on the other side, if you're very optimistic and very going out for going and optimistic about stuff, then the good thing is that things will happen and you jump into it. But the bad thing is that you are probably too naive and haven't thought about several risks, and that also gives problems. So it takes two to tango. If you're a leader, my first chapter is know thyself. So look back, look in the mirror. Who are you? What's you as a person? What's your personality? And use that as a base. And my story is not everybody has to be optimistic to lead with a smile. No, you have to be yourself. And if your leadership is a good match or a good connection in the company you work with, then the smile will come almost automatically, because you're yourself and you can sort of use your powers and talents to work with people.
Absolutely. And I think that's fundamental. I think if you try to fake it and emulate someone else or someone that you think, you're not being yourself, you're not being authentic, and people see straight through that. If you're not being...
Exactly.
Yeah. And the more that you are then true to yourself and you're honest with your strengths and your weaknesses, as you say, quite rightly, you become happier in yourself and in your abilities. And certainly having that ability to be able to say, and I think this is a key thing for leadership, is you can't solve all the problems. And so you do rely on the collective use and brain power of your team. And the problem-solving capabilities of your team. So fundamentally, it's to be open and honest that when you can't solve something, and use those people around you to get to those end results.
Exactly, you just have to say that. And I mean, you probably read it, but you have three roles as a leader. One of them is the manager. And in the past, a lot of people become a manager because they are very good at their job, like saying being the sales guy. You do great with customers, you sell a lot, and your turnover is good, etc., etc. And then they say, "Hey, you're so great, so can you lead the team, right?" And then people get into that, and there's a higher salary, etc. And they know everything. So most of the time, the effect is that the people you are leading think, "Hey, he knows everything, so he will solve it as well." And fortunately, more and more that's changing. People are selected as a leader or manager, or however you call it. We'll talk to on that probably, but they choose it because of who they are and not on what they know. They choose to be a leader based on attitude and not on the knowledge, and that's coming more and more normal, which is great, because if you're a leader and you have to solve all the problems, then A, you're working very hard, and B, you probably don't have the right solutions, and the longer it takes when you are so out of the going concern business yourself. So absolutely changing.
That's one of the things I wanted to really get into about, which was this 3 hats of leadership, because very much as you explained, in my own journey, I got promoted to a sort of more line manager type, middle manager type position, based on competent and technical skills, and there's nowhere else to go. But then realized really quickly that I needed to stay at the position, or even go further. Those competent skills or technical skills are no longer useful. It's a whole different set of skills that are necessary, which are these leadership skills. But what I found, I talked a lot and in length with a lot of people about the difference between management and leadership. And these 3 hats of leadership, which you refer to, is actually quite interesting, because I have always sort of suspected that people, when they get to these managerial roles, these leadership roles, probably have to wear these hats or have these qualities of leadership in different quantities. So where more people are better around the management side of things, and others might be better around the leadership stuff. But actually, you have to kind of do all 3 things. Yeah. So do you want to start off with sort of explaining what are the 3 hats of leadership?
Exactly, yeah, and because that's what the discussion you're telling about. You have managers and you have leaders. If you Google on that, and you Google on images, manager, leader, then you see a lot of pictures on this is what a manager is, which is not good, because you have to be a leader, which is good, right? So manager does A and leader does B, and B is better. and that's not story. So the story of the three heads is based on what employees need. So not what the manager has to do. The main cause why we're talking about three heads is what is the need from the employees. So in our three heads, people are very curious now, of course. And the first head is the leader. So that's one of the three roles is a leader. The second is the manager, and the third one is the coach. So I'll explain all three in a short moment. And the leader is based towards the future. So he tells a story, what's happening in the world, what is the story of the company, what are we planning, what are the values within the company. They give it a great example of how the values really turn out to be in real life, what's the real thing. So walk the talk, etc. is all in the leader's head. And they connect to that. So they connect people by saying, hey, this is our goal, this is where we are on, this is our why, and how we connect towards the future. And that leader's head, is not only the CEO telling it to 1,000 people in a room. Now, everyone who says I'm a leader should have a leader head. And if you're assistant account manager, if you're coordinator, or if you're team leader, whatever, everybody has that head, because the people you lead need that story to say, hey, where are we now? Where are we going? And how do we connect on that?
I agree with that. Yeah. So before we go on to the next one, I wanted to mention that to add to that is I very much about inspiring. You can do that on a sort of macro scale, which you talk about the CEO telling the story about the organization, and a micro scale, which you can do on one-to-one or as like a team. So one thing I explained very recently is trying to connect what people do on a daily basis as to why are we doing this. So we had somebody designing some service trenches, a trench for cables to go down or gas pipes. And it's not really exciting or inspiring piece of work. But when we started to connect at why we were designing it, why it's worth our attention and our dedication.
The effect is,
Exactly. The total vision changes. So I ask, who are we building this for? Who are we designing this for? The contractor, so that the contractor can know how to build it. No. Who are we designing this for? The clients. The client knows where the cables are. No. Who are we designing this for? No idea. We're designing this for the everyday person who's sat on a bus and doesn't want to get stuck in traffic because our service trench has failed and they're late for work. And if we just make this our best effort, give it our best attention, then in a small way, in an invisible way that people don't see, we're helping better someone else's lives. And then once we started connecting it on the micro scale, then that task became more and more important. It's like, I really have to make this the best I've ever done, this best service trench, and then it's going to make the life of someone better. But that's I think exactly as you say, doing it on the macro scale, doing it on the micro scale.
Exactly. And the trick is, a lot of people ask me, hey, I'm leading a group and I want to inspire them. So can you help me with that? And the story, of course, is if you're inspired yourself, if you have that story and why you're doing it as a company, then it's so much easier to tell that story and inspire others. So you have to sort of dig into that and find, hey, what's the why for my company or my team, and tell that story. And then people really will get it and get into it and say, hey, that's inspiring. Thanks, Alex, and etc. So that's great. And inspiring is one of the major roles for with the leading head on.
The other thing as well on a like a team level is asking some of the team members of what do we want to be known for? What do we do the best at? And then really sort of focusing in on that and starting that, leading with that.
Exactly. And a cool tip on that is, if you have 10 or 20 people in a team and you would ask this question, then you get 10 or 20 stories. So I always say, sit down, or when you're online, sit down and put everything on mute, write down your why for your team, and then combine and let everyone tell their own version of it and listen to it, and then combine that eventually to one story, because then it becomes powerful, right? So it has to be the language of everybody together, instead of the one guy, the leader, explaining the story and just say, this is it. No, the more you get information and purpose and examples from the group itself, the more it gets real and the more inspiring it will be. So
sorry, I interrupted you. You're going on to the second.
No, that's fine. I like it. So So first hat is leader. The second hat, and most of the people will recognize it, is the manager's hat, right? And it's not that leader is good and manager's hat is bad. No, you need that one as well. Manager is really in the now. It's managing the stuff. So KPIs, budget, planning, FTEs, making decisions on, hey, this is where we are working. I have to make a decision now. Connecting to people, saying what's good, but also saying where we have problems, etc. Solving problems, but not by knowing everything yourself. It's more like I always say, you're not a problem solver, you're a problem coordinator. You see something is wrong, you get people together, they are much more knowledgeable than you are. So get them in a room or get them online in a Zoom room and get them connected and let them solve the problem. And you are sort of facilitating that. It's in the here and now, and it's most of the time a blue part of, if you like colors, like it's blue, it's direct, it's getting stuff done, etc. And especially if you look in education or in healthcare, then this kind of manager's hat is less dominant. Most of the time, the third hat, which is the coach hat, is more dominant. And then in that kind of environments, you most of the time see that people find it more difficult to make decisions, or what's the process or whatever, right? So that's the part, the manager's part is more logical, it's clear, and it's very useful, but it's not the only thing you do as a leader. It's leading, it's managing, and then the third hat, of course, is the coaching role.
So can you tell me a bit more about then sort of coaching? Because I think sometimes a lot of people can get coaching confused with like therapy and things like that. Yeah. I think, I think your description in the book is pretty good.
Yeah, so there's always, of course, discussion about, can you be a coach from the people you are leading as well? Some people say, no, you can't. So you stop coaching. You have to facilitate that people work together, etc., but don't coach them. I don't agree on that, because the main thing between two people is, when you're a leader and you have an employee, is trust. And if trust is there and there's a connection and you talk to each other and you just trust each other, then the third hat is the coaching role, which is important because you have a connection. And what you do when you have a role as a coach to employees, then you do several things. The first thing is that you are talking to the other one and you look about development of him or her, and what are the plans, how does he or she want to develop. And you help with that, and you can facilitate that, of course, but especially by giving feedback, saying what you see, give them attention, give them appreciation, helps to discuss stuff with the other. And the other part is being honest. So just ask them, especially in this COVID-19 time, just ask them, how do you feel and how is it? And call them, and not by telling you your story. Of course, that can be a part of the coaching hat, can be how are you as a person and how are you coping with things, and help them to sort of get that mirror on their side as well. But the main thing is give them attention and see them. And I hear a lot of people saying, I have a manager, and sometimes he's a leader, but I never talk to him. He never calls me, and I don't dare to call him because he's probably very busy, etc. So the third hat is more about attention, and a lot of things which you see in my book is about give them autonomy, give them space, give them appreciation, look at the talents, etc. You can't do that if you don't have a connection, and if you don't have any conversations, unless you are talking to them only in team meetings with 40 or 50 people in the group. That's not coaching. That's more like being a manager and organizing the work, but that's not about giving attention. So the third role is especially about using your heart connection to each other. Talk when it's going great, but also when it's not going good. And if you have feedback or you have problems, or when you see things are not going well, just have that discussion, give feedback, and have an open discussion on what's happening here.
I think that's very much like, sorry, carry on.
And that takes time. And most of, especially if you have 10 or 15 direct reports, you have to take the time. But I always say, you better just call for 10 minutes and give them attention and plan it in your calendar. Everybody can do that, right? So, but most of the time we don't do that, and we are from one meeting going to the other one. So.
No, absolutely. I think this is very much about developing that one-on-one relationship with people. And if the only time you speak with people when something hasn't gone well, there's not a lot, as you say, trust built up, and that
if you smile, right, it's more like getting angry about it. So then the focus is more on the negative side of it.
Absolutely, yeah. If you've built up that rapport and that trust and that relationship, when you have something to feedback or something where you need to have a frank discussion, it can be received a lot better, because you can explain this is not an attack, or this is not an issue, but this is just something we have to talk about. But if you haven't built up that relationship beforehand, then it's never going to be received, I don't think. That's very much what it's. And helping the people you lead as well about developing their goals and their aspirations, I think is a fundamental part of that, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and what you said in the beginning, you're not a therapist, and that's, of course, if you have connecting and you have rapport with people and you connect and you hear stuff, you always have to know, what can I do, and where does it stop for me as being the coach leader from the other person, and where I have to say, hey, call your GP or tell a friend or whatever. So you have to know where the boundary is between what you can do and where you talk about and what you can't. And there's no list, this is allowed, this is not allowed. It's different for every person. But I had a lot of great conversations with employees about a lot of stuff, even private stuff and relationship, etc. But always to a certain level where I can say, hey, this is where we can talk about, and this is where it stops for me, but you really need help, so go and find it. So
absolutely,
important as well. Yeah,
and I think one of the key things that I'm always really passionate about in terms of coaching, and I think you mention it as well in your book, is about asking questions. So I always say, ask more questions than you answer, because if you're the type of leader that just answers all the questions and comes up with all the problems, people are going to stop telling you, giving their opinion. But if you ask more questions, and it's the type of question, isn't it, that you ask? It's can't be condescending or judging. It's got to be the right sort of questions. Yeah.
Yeah, and we are very bad at it in general. And I do a lot of training and leadership training and programs, etc. And one of my favorite topics to train is asking questions, because if you ask employees, what's the main thing which you miss from your leader, they say listening. So that's the first part. A lot of leaders start talking and don't stop. And if you ask a little bit more, then they say, well, they are listening, but they are listening to sort of think about what I'm going to say instead of really listening. And so I have a trick, which is also in my book, because everybody has that, right? I had a workshop last week, and one of the participants said, well, I'm planning a vacation when it's possible, and I'm going to do Route 66. So my eyes bumped out, because I did Route 66 25 years ago. So I instantly, even as a trainer, thought, oh, I know some great tips, etc. So my tip in my book is also, when you're sitting together and someone says, I'm going to whatever, Route 66 in this example, the great trick for you is to sort of relax and say, okay, I'm going to ask 3 questions. And even only after those 3 questions, I'm sort of allowed to maybe also say, hey, I've been there as well. But first 3 questions, and it's so hard to do that, but it's going to be fun as well, because if you say something and I will just jump into it and tell my story on my side, then it's about me and it's not about your dreams anymore. So ask 3 questions before you do anything else. And the second part, of course, is if you ask a question, ask it with a sort of appreciation, so a sort of positive, curious, and ask an open question, because we're very good at asking sort of questions with my story in, and even closed questions. So open questions with a sort of curiosity in it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely could not agree with you more. It's something that I realised when I was sort of, young engineer, sort of growing up, and I hated doing drawings and reports and it getting back completely red penned, change this, change that, do this, do that. And then I realised as I was going through that, I thought that's what you had to do. So I did it to people and I saw the effect of that. And then I sort of thought, well, I wouldn't like it if someone does it to me, so I'm going to change it because I don't want to be that person that people don't like. Change this. And also, it's not their own work anymore. As what you're saying, it's not there. They don't take any ownership of that. So asking those sort of open questions, they're making the decisions for themselves and they're getting to the solution and the answers themselves. And they take sort of pride and ownership over it, which is the right way it should be. So I would say sort of things like, is there a better way is that the best way we can phrase that? Is there a better way to phrase that? And they're coming up with suggestions themselves. And it's just amazing to sort of see people sort of grow and develop in that form.
Yeah.
And the one thing very much like what you said is I hold back my opinion until it's asked for. So I don't give any opinion at all until they sort of say, do you have any suggestions? And then I'll sort of say, okay, well, here's my suggestion. And if they're really, really struggling for it, and they're really not getting the point, I will sort of offer it. Would you like my suggestion? And only really when they say, yeah, what's your suggestion, would I offer it? And I was always bad before I sort of realized what a leader was, what a leader does. I was always really bad at sort of saying, well, this is my opinion, this is what we should be doing, let's just do it. And then not listening to anybody else. And now I've completely flipped that on its head.
Yeah, and of course, sometimes it's great to just give the suggestion, right? If people are just started on a new task, they don't have a clue, then you give them some suggestions, say, hey, good luck with it, and you can do it, and let me know if you have any questions. But most of the time, people know or sort of should have know what the story is or what they should do, but they're careful or they are afraid to make mistakes or etc. So as long as you give suggestions, then they get sort of lazy because they say, hey, this is the problem and Michael will fix it for me. So I'll sort of get into a lazy focus and just hear the answer. So you have to be really aware, and that situational leadership from Mercy, this Blanchard, that it's old, but it's still there. You have to be really aware of, do I give suggestions? Am I helping? Or helping myself because it goes quicker and then I can go on and do something else. So that's the big difference, I think.
Absolutely. And please just mentioned Blanchard, because that was one of the first books I ever read when I started on this journey, which is Leadership and 1 Minute Manager.
And it's still very useful. I'm still training almost every week with people because they use most of the time the wrong style versus the wrong person, right? So it's still something very useful.
I had that when I was doing a bit of training myself, and someone asked, what do you do if someone doesn't want to be coached? I was like, well, then you've got the wrong behaviors for that development level. They're probably in supporting, so you just need to support a bit more. But then obviously if that goes wrong for them, it's not to sort of, I told you. Don't judge. It's about being there to be supportive. That's what about supportive is. And it doesn't matter if then you go back to the coaching level, but at least if they've tried things on their own. I don't think you can force people. You can't force to coach people. People only get coached if they want to get coached.
It takes two to tango, right? So that's the main story about coaching. You have to have a relationship and being connected, trust each other. And based on that, you can also say, hey, this is not working, and what can we do else, or what can we do more?
Absolutely. And the other thing I wanted to sort of mention about what's in your book is this walk the talk. So can you explain to me a bit more about walk the talk and what you think around that, what it means for leaders?
Yeah, so we talk about leadership, and I'm saying in my book, if you Google on leadership, you got about 70,000 books, and there's so much stories about leadership. And I always myself also had discussions within the bank by what is a good leader, and then there are memos and profiles and etc. So there's a lot about talking about leadership or writing about leadership, and I'm doing a little bit along on that now. But that's not so important, because the main thing is that you show what you mean. And I've seen a lot of examples also in my own time as a leader that, for instance, in the book, I'm telling the story about we're standing in a group, and CRM, customer relationship management, is very important, because if you talk to a customer, you have to write down in the system what you promised and what you talked about, because the next time someone else will talk to that customer and he or she can read and then be great service to the customer. Plain story, logical, everybody gets it, until the moment that you're working with a customer and you know that one of the managers talked to that customer as well, and he says, oh, I don't have time for CRM, I'm too busy, and etc. And that happens a lot. So walk the talk is about if you practice what you preach. So if CRM is important, and if you talk to a customer, you use the system, then you as a leader at least have to do it yourself as well. And give the great example. And I see the same sort of examples now in COVID-19. A lot of people here in Holland, of course, as well, are working from home. And I hear stories, everybody's working from home, except of my management team, because they are still going to the office and they're sitting together. And I mean, that's a disaster, of course, but it happens. So walk the talk is giving the example, showing what you expect and showing what's important. And if you do that yourself, then the chance of people following you on that is much bigger than doing exactly the other way around. So that's walk the talk in a shutdown, nutshell. Yeah.
The sort of analogy that I use for that, the reason why I like paperback books more than I do sort of ebooks, if you like, is because I'm constantly telling my children to get off technology. And if they then watch me, even if it's, reading a book on a technology, they don't differentiate. So they just, okay, well,
no, exactly.
It's all right, you're on your phone or you're on the tablet reading a book. But if I read a book, then I'll just catch them getting books out of the shelf and reading it themselves. They just emulate that sort of behavior. So you've got to be that example, haven't you? And I think it's also a way of building trust. It's like we see this a lot in politics. A lot of people promising the earth, and then when they get into power, don't deliver. So it's about doing what you said you were going to do, and that's what builds trust. Do you think?
Yeah, and that's what you see all the time. You hear the story one side, and you see what's really happening on the other side. And if there's a combination between the two, if you say vulnerability is important and you show that, then it's great. But if your vulnerability is important and you sort of brag about stuff without being honest on the other hand, people will really in 2 seconds notice what's happening. And the effect is that they are doing the same things. They will copy what you do as a leader, because they always talk about it, right? They see you. So give the right example has a major impact on people. So if you have new policies or you think about something new, you really, can I do it myself as well? If you don't like it or you don't believe in it, you probably change the policy is even better than doing something which you don't believe in yourself. So yeah, that's it's tough. And your example with reading a book in my paperback, which is coming up, instead of using the ebook on the iPad, yeah, that's a good example. You have to think about what do people see what I'm doing and what's the effect of it.
Yeah, you sort of become a bit, as easy, become under the microscope a little bit. So you have to be an exemplar of what those behaviors you expect to see. So yeah, and that's absolutely brilliant stuff. So we're sort of coming towards the end, fast to the end of this podcast.
So fast, unbelievable, great.
One thing I would say is, your book is jam-packed full of great stuff and stuff that I genuinely just resonates with me completely. Exactly my own same sort of beliefs are completely, are in that book. So I do recommend absolutely everybody goes out and reads that. But what I do with sort of every podcast is I do ask the guest to give me a question. It's not one I'm going to answer now. It's one that I will answer at the beginning of the next one. So, Alex, do you have a question you want to ask?
Of course, yeah. And I've thought about that, of course, because you were a leader and now you're into leadership, especially by doing this podcast and sort of deep dive into it. So my question would be, let's say you become a leader in 2 months. So you got a group, etc. What is the first thing which comes into mind which you would do differently now because of all the knowledge you gained versus the moment you stopped as a leader?
That's a really well-timed question, actually. So I don't know. Really well-timed question. Because
I didn't know that. But...
No, it's amazing, really. Because of obviously the pandemic, I haven't had a sort of collective team around to sort of go at a project and really and build all these great things that we talk about. And there is that project on the horizon that we've been talking about. And we're hoping it's going to come to fruition. And the one thing that excites me more than anything, I mean, the project itself is exciting, but one thing that excites me more than anything is the team, the leadership side of things that I'm really excited about. So that's a really well-timed question and one that I'm really eager to answer because it's one I've been going around in my own head.
Yeah,
great.
I will
Fantastic.
Hear it later. Cool.
So thank you. So the last question I want to ask is, what do you think is the most important aspect of leadership?
Yeah, and thanks for that question, because I wrote a book, it's 100 pages about leading with a smile. My main message would be, if you are a leader, give attention to your people. And of course, people say, oh, sure, but that's the main problem. The main problem is that we don't take time to walk around, or in this time of COVID-19, take 10 minutes time and call people, and not being on a call with everybody. No, just give one-on-one attention to your people. Only give 5 minutes a day to one person and the next day someone else. That's the main story about leading with a smile, because it makes you happy, because you have connection to someone else and you hear stuff. You also hear what the problems are, etc. And that's sometimes hard, but that's the case of being a leader. And on the other hand, attention gives a smile to the other one, because they are seen, they are heard, and there's a big lack of attention. So my main story will be, if you are a leader and just take 10 minutes or 5 minutes a day by giving that part of attention next to all the other stuff you have to do, then you probably have a first step towards leading with a smile. So that's my story. Yeah.
That's great. And I could not agree more. So Alex, look, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've really loved reading your book. So this has been really great for me. So thank you ever so much.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. And thanks a lot.